Hello everybody, this is Shadow of Serbius. It was an MMORPG back in 1991 that predates Ultima Online by a good chunk of time. Basically, it's a graphical MUDs or multi-user dungeons kind of deal. It ran on the Imagination Network, which was eventually shut down by AOL, who purchased the service in order to kill it because they wanted their Neverwinter Nights game to be more successful. Not the BioWare Neverwinter Nights game that I recommend to pretty much everybody that has all the community-made modules, but rather an older, more antiquated version that looks more like Gauntlet for the NES. Anyway, this was a mostly a community-driven game at the time. You know, the Sierra Network was well known for these kind of things. There were 3 games total. There was Serbius, Twinion, and Cador. And the idea is that Twinion was a direct sequel to Serbius, and then Cador was kind of a spin-off in the same universe, but, you know, like a different kind of thing. Anyway, there are 3 ways you can play Serbius today. You could go to an Abandonware site and get the DOSBox version, which is the, let's just say, I would say the least optimal way to play. Then there's Innbarn, which is a service that kind of lets you play, you connect to kind of a proxy of the Imagination Network. It tricks the client into thinking the Imagination Network's still running, basically. So there are issues with both the Abandonware single-player version and the Innbarn version, in the sense that they're very old and they have all the classic bugs and, you know, the things that you'd expect back in the back in that time. Anyway, the result of all of this is you know, like, for the longest time, we have just kind of had to deal with that. But then a few years ago, Zane here came up with basically rebuilt the game. Came up with a new version of it. It's kind of like the way I constantly talk about how Daggerfall couldn't be my favorite Elder Scrolls game until Daggerfall Unity came along and fixed it. In that sense, there were a lot of issues with Serbius that I feel were vastly mitigated, or in other ways, the game was made better by this Medievalands kind of service that has been created by Zane. And I'm here today talking with Zane about Medievalands. It's been about 2 years, roughly, since we last talked. How you doing, Zane?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, when we spoke last, the pandemic was just ramping up. It was right in late March 2020.
Mm-hmm.
A lot has happened since then, and there's been a lot of improvements to the game, of course, which is far more important.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see here. Things I've noticed just off the top of my head. You know, when you go to the tavern, there are guilds, which didn't exist in the vanilla game. There are bulletin boards, like built-in forums into the game. I mean, the Imagination Network had forums, but not Serbius directly. And
That's right. They had like 10 posts per page, if you remember.
Yeah. And then finally, speedrunning. Like, actual any percent speedrunners. I actually watched one on YouTube. It was kind of impressive.
This is MRPR Miller and his gang, and the idea that you could beat this game in 2 hours is just mind-blowing to me. I had no idea that was possible.
Let me ask you something. What came first? The speed run or Sovereign Scrolls being removed from the shop?
I have made no changes to make speedrunning more difficult.
Okay.
I would never do that. They have definitely, in the way that speedrunners often do, they have discovered sequence breaking, right?
Yes.
So like new additions that I have made to the game, which suddenly make the game like in a weird way more plausibly beatable. They've taken advantage of every single one of those.
Yes. That makes perfect
with more
sense.
To come, I am certain.
That makes perfect sense. So for those who don't know what I just said, they're in the vanilla game. That is to say, the offline version and the Innbarn version. There is an item from the shop called a Sovereign Scroll, which allows you to cast a spell called Control, which can be in some circumstances overpowered. Now, a prime strategy was to sell the resuscitator you started the game with when you created a character, and buy one of those scrolls immediately in order to try to, get past some difficult content. I mean, I almost think that the game is better for having removed it from the shop, and I've actually looted several of them off mobs as like random loot. So I think I don't think the game's ruined or anything, but for people who don't know the game and don't understand, there's basically an overpowered item that doesn't ruin the game for being removed, but I did notice. I did notice it was gone.
When I watch these guys do their speed running, I definitely see them selling the resuscitator right off the bat and then buying a bunch of scrolls and just going wild.
Yes.
They in the old version of the game they called it pumping, right? Because
Yes.
you would be hitting that pump room and running the pump left, right, and center
Yes.
until you hit enough level that you could, I don't know, take on the next level of challenge instead of
Yes.
spending a lot of time in the mines.
That makes perfect sense. I know I did stop at a couple places and farmed. It's
We call it farming now, right?
yes, we call it farming now. Of course, let's be honest here. This is an interesting version because we don't have trainers. Back in the day, we didn't know the word trainer. We just knew this program called Vitamin F could edit your character files.
Right.
But now we call them trainers because we actively have them for pretty much all different kinds of games. As kind of hack utilities that just let us play with data files in ways that game developers never intended. But since this is more of a live service kind of situation, where you log onto the server and your character files are it's server authoritative, not client authoritative, right?
Yeah, that's right. The old version of the game, it's kind of peer-to-peer in a sense that all communications went through the main server, but the server didn't do anything with those messages. It simply forwarded them to anybody who was either in the tavern when you were chatting in the tavern, or anybody who was in your party when you were partied up.
Yeah.
This is the Wild West, old days of DOS, when there's no memory protection. You could load a memory program in there, and suddenly your death darts are not doing 1,200 damage, they're doing 40,000 damage.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I've noticed the bank as well, the item bank just being there. That kind of threw me for a loop. I'm like, wait a second, you combined the two bags, which is good because I hated juggling things between them, and then you added an item bank. And I'm looking at that going, yeah, considering there are these different new items, there's a new loot system in the game. Can you tell me a little bit about the new loot system and how it varies from the original game?
This is something that we were talking about on our last stream. I remember that. So, as I'm sure anybody who has spent time with dungeon crawlers over the last decade can tell, this is heavily inspired by the Diablo style of games, right?
Yes.
You get a prefix, you get a suffix, sometimes you get both. Those suffixes are arranged in layers in that higher quality ones give you more of a benefit. Some items can have some types of prefixes and suffixes, but not others. For example, you're only going to find magic find, I think, on the trinkets, for example, rings and amulets. So the idea here is as you go deeper... Sorry, go ahead.
Hold on a second. Do you see the live stream right now?
Oh, yeah, I'm looking at it.
Yeah, but this isn't a trinket. This is a helmet.
Okay, so obviously it's on helms as well.
Okay.
Now, I put this system together back in 2020. It's been a long time and a lot of miles since then.
Okay, because again, I've been off doing other things, and I decided to come back because number one, I've seen it has changes, and number two, I thought just now would be a good time to revisit it. I think a couple years later, more or less. Let's see what's changed, and I'm really happy with what I've seen so far. Have you what would you say it's accomplished as far as changing the way people experience the game?
I think that the number one change is one that you actually saw in your last playthrough, which
Hmm.
still exists, and it is the thing that you're looking at right now. It's the
Hmm.
tooltips on the screen.
Yes,
Because if you remember, the original game did not tell you what an item did.
that's
And so
right.
it was impossible for a person to tell without a lot of like fiddling around and seeing what items were doing
Hmm.
more damage when you equip them, to tell what items were better than other items. And then some of the effects, for example,
Curse.
resistance to poison, resistance to paralyze, like
Hmm.
you couldn't tell what effects you had equipped unless you suddenly realize, like, oh, I'm not getting poisoned anymore. How
But
nice is
that's
that?
RNG. You can never, like, with RNG, you can never be anywhere in the realm of certain unless you do like clinical trials where you will attempt something, say 500 times, and then tabulate the data. And normal players don't work that way.
No. So the item tooltips, they expose all that information which
Hmm.
wasn't previously available. It means you now have a direct window into what is going on inside the game mechanics, which is really cool. Every player I have spoken to really loves this, but it also means that they are making decisions based on new information that was never available before to players,
That's right.
not even in the various FAQ that were floating around the pre-internet on the BBSs.
That's
This
right.
fundamentally changes the way that the game is played. Players don't really see it that way.
Hmm.
Perhaps you could argue that this is a bad change. I think it's a good thing. More information for the players is always better in my mind.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I do notice that Magic Find is a thing, so I imagine there's a bit more randomness in the drop tables then.
Oh my goodness, I was heavily inspired by Diablo 2.
Hmm.
Um, yes, as you gain additional magic find power, it boosts your chance of getting a better quality drop.
Hmm.
Uh, Perhaps people on your stream are familiar with how the World of Warcraft hit table works, where you try to push like crushing blow off the hit table. Getting more magic find pushes the chance of getting a lower quality drop off the hit table
That
or off the
is,
drop table.
yeah, that's very interesting. And I noticed threat is a thing as well. The like aggro, the ability to tank. Like, is this a thing now?
That's a thing. And this is super important, especially when you have some wizards that don't have as many hit points.
Hmm.
You definitely want to have somebody up front who can take those blows and not distribute them to the rest of the party.
I
Same
see.
thing.
Now, is the threat automatically applied, or is it when you hit with the weapon?
It's automatically applied. It's actually a pretty boring implementation. Because you have 14 threat,
Hmm.
you actually take up 114 chances of getting hit
Yeah.
by an enemy attack, whereas your other friends only have 100 if their threat is unmodified.
I see. So, for example, Con, you're here, right?
Yes.
What is your current threat level? It's in the negatives, I believe.
Yes, I believe I got like -9 or something on one of my items.
So that means, with the two combined, the higher threat and the lower threat, they work together, I assume.
Yeah, so if you have 114 and Khan has -9, so 91,
Mhm.
any attack that happens, Zarik, you're going to be hit 55% of the time. Khan, nice to hear your voice again, by the way, 45%.
That makes a lot of sense. And you say it's a boring implementation, but I think that at the end of the day, when you get a system like this, I think it needs to be functional first and foremost, and not add. There's some complexity is good, but then there's a point where complexity becomes convoluted and overloads a player's sense of what's going on, I think.
Yeah, I think that that's very true. If this were the kind of game that had thousands of players, people who are willing to sit down
Mhm.
and do the theory crafting, then more complexity might be welcome, at least at the edges of the mechanics.
Yeah,
But yeah, especially for such a small implementation. And I didn't want to change the original game too much. If I'm adding something, it needs to be just the icing on top of the original.
that makes perfect sense to me. Um, the item bank, I assume that the new items kind of led into the idea of needing an item bank. The idea that you you find a really cool drop, but it's not quite suitable for you, so you keep it for someone else?
Yeah, do you have the time to hear a goofy story about the item bank?
Go ahead.
These are implemented actually as a container item. So
Mhm.
your regular equipment and your inventory are
Mhm.
next to each other in memory. And then I
Yeah.
didn't really want to just add on a whole different, like, 10 slots.
Mhm.
Instead, I created a 10 slot item that fits in a specific item bank slot, right? Okay.
Okay.
So an interesting aside here is there is a specific combat that happens late in the game where if
Mhm.
you are not wielding the appropriate sword, right, the flex sword,
Yes.
the enemy destroys your current weapon.
Yes.
Well, what happens if you are not currently wielding a weapon? The way that the map script for that encounter works is it checks the item identifier for your current weapon and it
Mhm.
deletes the first instance of that item in your inventory. So if you have a sword, item identifier 3, it erases the first sword in your inventory. Done. Well, what if you're not actually equipping anything? Because plenty of people actually unequip their favorite weapon before they fight these guys. And why
Yes.
shouldn't they? They know they're going to get their thing destroyed. So here's what happens. The game checks for your item identifier. It doesn't understand the idea of no item, so it just says, oh, item identifier 0. Well, I'm going to let you guess what happens when it starts iterating through your equipment. And
Yes.
it gets to the item bank, which also has an item identifier of 0. Guess
Yep.
what? Your item bank just disappeared. And I had this persistent problem, this bug, where
Mhm.
people were saying, like, as I approached the end of the game, all of my favorite items in my item bank disappeared. What's up with that? Well, now you know the
Yeah.
rest of the story.
That's kind of nuts. Um, I looked at this item bank and I thought to myself, you know, um, maybe you could expand the bank
Yes.
for no, get this. Here's what I thought. Um, for a good amount of money, we're talking like 1 million, 10 million, 50 million. And it's like, I want 4 more bank slots. Well, that'll be 50 million. And get people to pool that money. Maybe have a guild bank that works that way. That's
That's
what I was thinking.
That is a phenomenal idea.
Mhm.
The only thing that is really keeping that from
Okay.
happening is the currency at issue is not gold. The currency is pixels. And if you notice, there's not many
Mm.
pixels left on this screen.
So what I would do here then is we'd have to have some kind of extra screen then, unfortunately,
There you go.
or some kind of tabbing issue where you'd in the in the great world of websites, you very often have paging where you simply instead of having boxes at the top of the screen um, for items, you'd have boxes at the top of the screen for pages. And that would just, it would just add a page in theory. That someone in chat said pages. I mean, that is definitely a way to think about it, but that just came
I
to
love
mind.
that idea. Here's what
Mhm.
happens when you get a bunch of creative people together. They got a bunch of ideas, they're going to make something work. That's actually implementable.
Mhm.
We'll see if it happens.
Yeah, I'm not telling you what to do with your game. I'm just giving you ideas. um, but yeah, I looked at this and I noticed that there are achievements now. Um, I remember that the game had to track, like, if you went to a particular encounter before, so that you can't just double dip the one-time reward for completing the encounter. So all of this stuff was tracked in the game previously, but I notice now it's being displayed as achievements.
Yep. So I write in C sharp.
Mhm.
This server is running on .NET Core 6.0 long time support. It's really super easy in that language to add what's called an event sync.
Mhm.
So basically, I just say whenever this type of value changes, anything that's subscribed to that value automatically gets a notification.
Mhm.
And wow, that's all it took to add the data that you see now reflected on this screen. So, for example, you see that in Yserbius, find 3 stashes left behind
Yeah.
in the mines. There are 3 dungeon level flags, and by dungeon level, I mean they never change. You set them once, they never get unset. And once you found those 3 little pieces of gold or those 3 items, you automatically unlock that achievement. This is not something that your average player is ever going to find. It only is going to happen for people who are the kind of people that explore the entire map, which I notice you have been doing.
It's true. I want to fill in all the boxes pretty much, unless they're, of course, I am looking at traps. I'm like, oh, I have to hit this, and so I don't fall in a pit. But other than that, yes, I want to fill out the entire map. That's kind of thing that I have fun doing.
You are the player that's going to, of course, get all the achievements then.
I see. I see. Um, and on records, of course, I see the whole speedrunner the whole speedrun records thing. And let me ask you, when did the idea of officially supporting speedrunning originally come to your mind?
So there was a group of players, and MRPR Miller, as I have said his name
Hmm.
previously, he has been one of the most interactive in the forums, and he
Right.
actually kind of talked about it. He's like, I'm interested in doing like speedruns. Does anybody have any ideas as to what good objectives would be?
Hmm.
And I thought to myself, you know what? It would only take me a couple of weeks of after hours work to add some actual framework
Yeah.
to this game. Having done that and seeing his little or his speedrun community, it's the Quest for Glory
Yeah.
speedrunners. They normally run Quest for Glory games, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
One of my favorite games. Now they're actually playing this game and speedrunning it.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting because again, I saw on YouTube one of his any percent speed runs.
Wild.
Yeah. Let me see here. Yeah, that was what immediately jumped to the forefront of my mind. Was that the idea that the inventory was completely changed, that we so much of the game feels more accessible. That's the way I'd phrase it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've added just about everything that I can
Hmm.
for the game. I don't change the map scripts. I don't want to change the underlying mechanics
Hmm.
more than I already have. At this point, I've pretty much topped out in terms of what I can add to the game.
Yep. Have
Several people in the chat over the course of this stream had commented things like, oh, this game is from 1991. This is really hardcore that you guys are playing this. And it speaks to your work, Zane, and what you've been able to do with this new client, that it doesn't feel like stodgy or old or musty. It's very, these kind of quality of life changes that you've made have made it, like Zarek said, more accessible and brought to the forefront just the core experience of the dungeon diving and the role playing and having fun with your friends killing monsters. That you've taken all the kind of things that hamstrung the experience, like not being able to know what weapons do, and addressed all those faults or old concepts and made it fresh and exciting.
I really appreciate that perspective. I agree with you. And one of the things that really unlocked that possibility is the fact that Yserbius is pretty much a simple game. I mean, it has to be. It's a MMO. The amount of data that you could store on servers in 1991, not to mention exchange with people who are running with modems that are 2400 baud, and that's not bytes per second, that's bits
bits.
per
Yes,
second.
I had a 24 BPS modem when I played this. That's true.
So did I. So, Yserbius just kind of strips away the detail that single player bobbers had. The world's very simple. There's a dungeon, it goes deep into the earth. The dungeon never changes other than those couple of flagged encounters. Interactions with NPCs are only barely more complex than step on a tile and see a message. So there's not a lot of complexity for me to handle here. It's really easy to add some modern UI conveniences that I think really improve the game.
So
But this is what you're looking at right now is one of my favorite things that I've added. In the original game, I had one of my friends play it, and they were looking at this just the tiles on the floor in front of them, and there was no arrows to move around and no map.
yeah.
And they said, "Okay, is this just the next character screen? I don't understand what I need to do here." And the moment I heard that, I knew I had to put the map up front, the arrows up front, so that people knew that they could explore right from that screen.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Con, did you have anything else you wanted to ask about?
Well, I think we were talking a little bit about complexity earlier, and I was curious, out of all of these seemingly small changes that you have made, and especially with regard, I don't know if we want to get into Twinion, but what has been most difficult for you to implement in terms of the amount of work required, or even in some of these newer changes, did you have to refactor any significant portion of your own work?
You know, that's a great question and not one that I've spent a lot of time on. I approach this game as kind of my hobby. This is just what I do when I'm not working my regular 9 to 5. So, with that said, I think that the point that you raised in terms of refactoring is the number one thing that, or let's take a step back. You will notice that you have a single server here that runs both games, Yserbius and Twinion. In the original instance, which you can still play on Innbarn, there is a separate server for Yserbius and Twinion, and for each one of those different little taverns that you can join. Modifying the server so that it could both run 2 concurrent games, or actually an infinite number of games, right? But, you know, Yserbius and Twinion only for now.
Yes.
Plus have different kinds of players, which are represented by different data structures, different classes, different functionality. The maps run different kinds of scripts because I had improved my ability to understand the original game between when I was deciphering the Yserbius scripts and when I was deciphering the Twinion scripts. Like, it's all just... So making a single server that could run multiple games, I think, was the most complicated thing that I had to do.
I see. All right. My question is now, like, if you had a player, you had someone who, say, played Diablo 2 or Diablo 3, and they wanted to look at this, and like they've never played a game like this before. Well, would you recommend they just jump in? Would you recommend they pick a specific class or a race or anything like that? Like, do they need to play with other people? See what I'm saying? Like, how would you recommend they approach this game if they've never played anything like this before?
Well, you know, in the original iteration of this game, you're playing this back in 1991.
Yes.
You're going to be playing with other players. Not because there's a force multiplier, which there is. When you're in a party, there's just so much more survivability. Although I see Danny Boyo has asked, is solo viable? Absolutely, yes. But the reason you were partying is because the people who had figured out how to solve the various quests and puzzles in the game, you needed to have them along for the ride, or in fact even leading you to teach you how to play the game. So if I were to give one word of advice for somebody who's never played this game before and perhaps has never played one of these early 9-degree blobbers, I would say play it with the walkthrough in hand. Now, that's kind of unsatisfying, to be entirely honest. I feel like a game should be playable based on information that's available in the game.
Yes.
There you go. Yes. So there are multiple walkthroughs that are on the Medievalands website. Tiger's walkthrough is phenomenal for Yserbius, highly recommended. One of the things I've discussed with the with some of the more technology-minded people that have played this game and exist in this little development server that I put up, a little development Discord, is can we add a quest log to this game. Something that doesn't necessarily hold your hand,
Yeah.
but gives you some breadcrumbs as to what you should be doing next.
The game development concept of conveyance.
Yeah, you need to be able to communicate at least the goals to the players, for Pete's sake.
Yes.
Oh, and actually, I've added some of that. As you walk through here and turn left, you'll notice that there's a message that appears on the wall. And that was not in the original game. I've gone through and I've tried to add some clues.
What, that exit sign?
No, the thing that says, well, you're going to see it as you turn left here.
All right. Give me just a
Healing
second.
power. There we go.
So, yeah, Con, you want a healing power ring?
That sounds good to me.
There you go. That's what this game allows now. I mean, that wasn't in the original game. You basically get the same items more or less, right? In the original game.
That's right. Yeah, and those original items are still in the game. I haven't taken those away, but I did add the Diablo-style items for other drops. Okay, so turn to the left here.
Okay. Turn to the left. A draft stirs the air here. Okay.
See it now. We've made it more obvious. We've had one of those weird like meta conversations, right?
Yes.
Because the game says to you, "Oh, there's a draft," but what the player is intended to interpret is like, "Oh, I need to do something special here."
Yes.
So, can we add a quest log? And the answer is not very easily. The game just does not have enough data in it, the original iteration, to make it easy to add a quest log. And that's really sad. It would require a lot of work to add that.
Yeah.
And do I have the desire to continue putting lipstick on a pig? Maybe not this
All I can think of is you'd have to change the way the quests function to begin with. Like, for example, Cleowen's regalia. You would have to create a way in which to communicate to players that his pieces are not to be gotten rid of, and if they somehow are gotten rid of, then it resets that part of the quest log, or otherwise you're going to be in a bad situation where the quest log is disconnected from what you actually need to do.
I mean, this is a solved problem from the perspective of somebody who has read, for example, the Mango source code, the way that a WoW private server manages quest logs, which is what I did when I was thinking about how I might implement this. And I've seen the WoW quest data format that is in the DBC files that come down to the client. The issue is, like, I'd have to code all of that myself and add all that data myself. And as any game developer knows, like, the first 90% of game development is about developing the engine. The second 90% of game development is putting the data together.
Yes, absolutely. So, you mentioned Diablo 2 was a huge inspiration for you.
I think it was a huge inspiration for everybody who played that game.
Yes, but let me ask you something. Have you ever played Median XL?
Median XL, I never have. Oh my.
Median XL, I'm just going to pull up their trailer so you can see, assuming, YouTube wants to actually load the file, because, sometimes YouTube wants to work, sometimes it doesn't, and my best way to deal with this is to hit F5 if it doesn't load, and then try it again, and there you go, you see it works. All IT people will tell you, have you tried turning it off and turning it back on? And that's what I just did. I refreshed the page. So, Median XL specifically changes all the skills. The idea is that, as you can see, there's a gladiator, berserker, and throwing. There's 3 skill trees for each, where there used to be 1 previously. And it adds a bunch of different skills. I'm not suggesting you add different skills. I'm not suggesting you add hundreds of new items, except that you probably did. Or change the way crafting works. These are all things they do. However, when it says the king of in-game content, you notice that Dimensional Labyrinth 10, that's because they added rifts from Diablo 3 into Diablo 2. because they
Oh,
could.
okay.
But they've also added these different areas, and what I mean by that is you'll be walking along the Rogue's Monastery in Act 1, and you'll see like an archway which didn't exist there before. It's just a new door. And if you click on it, if you mouse over it, it's red. It's red text, and it says like the burning courts or whatever. And if you go in there, you're fighting level 95 mobs, or level 110 mobs, or level 120 mobs. And the idea is that all scattered across the world, and it warns you with red text, and it uses the same restrictions of, if you aren't this level, you really shouldn't be going in here. It basically scatters these ultra high level areas across the world, so it feels natural to, oh, this is a wing of the Rogue's Monastery that was taken over by another demon. And that it uses the same art assets. It uses the same everything, except the numbers are different. And, sometimes some of the monsters may be remixed or brought in from other areas, but it's still fundamentally the same video game. It's just, these are challenges for end-game players. That's kind of how Media and Exile works, is they add in a lot of extra content all over the place, and it's just hidden in different areas. And I always thought that was kind of neat. And when you said you didn't want to change Serbius, I thought, yeah, I mean, but I wouldn't be against adding like a new wing to the dungeon, like a new map. And don't change the existing maps. Just add a door and lock the door based on completion of the main quest. Oh, you complete the main quest. Here, have a new map. It's kind of like the old one, but it's a lot harder. And I don't mean a whole new dungeon. Okay, I don't mean like a whole new version of Serbius, but like the Mines version 2. You know what I mean? Like something like that, like a single map page. That might be possible to do, and you lock it behind completion of what is basically the game itself as it is now. Just a thought. It's not something I would, because there's obviously development work that would be required to do something like that. But I'm just saying, when you mentioned Diablo 2, that came to mind how Media and XL did add a ton of new areas and things like that. There's new areas to discover. You see what I'm saying?
I think that's a great idea. When I'm old, and I grew up in the era of like mixtapes, right? You take content that's out there and you put it together in your own collection, your own way, your own format. I feel like PC gamers have it so good in that our ability to take existing games, figure out the data formats, remix them, put them up together in a whole new format, just like I've done with Yserbius, just like I see Meridian XL has done. That is such a core part of being a PC gamer to me. This is a cool idea. I could definitely see something like that. There's always the question, like, what amount of effort needs to be put into this game at this point? Like, if I put another couple hundred hours into this, like, is that going to really change anything?
I'll let you in on a little secret.
Go ahead.
And that is, you never do something like this just for the sake of the game. What I mean by that is, all of this would be proof of concept or proof of workflow for your own video game in the same style. Like, you would develop tools or systems with which you would adapt into your own legally distinct version of this.
There you go.
Yes.
It's interesting that you say that. Like, a lot of the code that is in Yserbius, I actually wrote for my Ultima Online client, which I published back in 2009. Like, there's a ton of code that I would not have been able to rewrite Yserbius if I hadn't had so much time invested into rewriting Ultima Online first. I took so much of that code and just bopped it wholesale into Yserbius.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying, though, is that if you were to add like a new wing of the dungeon and just say, champions of Serbius, those who have completed the challenge, a new challenging wing of the dungeon, 3 new areas, Little did they know that you were actually using that tech to do a proving ground for new monsters and new AI for your own video game that's based on Serbius, but, again, legally distinct. That's what I'm saying.
Love that idea.
Yeah.
Have you seen the map maker that's in Yserbius?
I poked at it originally before you mentioned it, but I accidentally clicked on it, basically.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, I bumbled my way into it, and I thought that was kind of neat.
It's hidden, but anybody in the game can access it. All you
Yes.
need to do is log on to the game, click on the account screen, and then click right above the back button. And
Yes.
suddenly, like, you have the ability to not edit the maps because there's no save functionality
Yes.
yet. I'm trying to figure out, like, what is the appropriate mechanism to show a player that they, like, do I build a workspace for every player, right?
Yeah, I
Without, like, interfering with the game as it's running. I don't know. And also, like, not allowing other people to rewrite other people's like versions of the maps.
What you would do is you would create an export function that would simply save a script file to their computer, and that would be a local script. And if the script was good enough, they could submit it, and you'd be like, yeah, I can use that. And but as far as the form goes, make sure there's a release of intellectual property in it, because you don't want shenanigans to happen later.
Oh, we definitely want to avoid shenanigans.
Yes. But as long as you do that, just have a click-through user agreement that basically says, you own whatever they submit, and because they're submitting a script file, they're not submitting a Serbius dungeon, right? That it's important to make the distinction. So they submit a script file, and you look at this and you go, yeah, this is acceptable. I'll and I'll build it, or I'll have it. You build a system with which it can generate Serbius levels based on the map that they build. And if it turns out the map is good and you like it, implement it, and then maybe steal it in that sense. And if you can create a workflow where many of the users can do the work for you, then you've killed two birds with one stone, because all you have to do is populate that with events, like tiles in the world that have, oh, well, this is a particular fight. Oh, this is some dialogue about, a particular story event, very simple stuff. Now, someone said go full Warcraft 3. That's not practical, right? I'm just talking about I'm talking about a simple. They export the information from the map editor, spits it out into a script file. They submit the script file to you. You feed it into a little program that generates a Serbius map out of it. It's you'd obviously have to generate that program yourself, make it work, but the idea is, instead of building, say, 20 or 30 maps yourself, or 20 or 30 Serbius levels yourself, you build a program that will spit out maps based on, or levels based on user-generated content that you then go and approve, whether it's good or not. That's what I would recommend.
That seems like a decent idea. Interesting that you should mention scripting language. I wrote, I transpiled the LOX language interpreter and virtual machine. This is, if any of you that are listening are really into building programming languages and you're like looking to do your first one, I highly recommend going to craftinginterpreters.com. This is Bob Nystrom. He of the game programming patterns fame. He's put up this like how-to language to build your own programming language. So I have my own LOX interpreter, which is running on this server. Actually, the Twinion dungeon entrance map is not running in C#. It is not the transpiled version that came from the original game files. It is actually running in locks. So the potential to not just build a map, but also to script it yourself as a player.
Yeah.
It's in the game. It's just like, how do I expose that? Seems really complicated.
I mean, I think what it comes down to, have you by chance played Path of Exile before?
I have missed that one entirely.
Okay, well, Path of Exile is very much a Diablo 2. It's inspired by Diablo 2. It uses the materia system from Final Fantasy VII. You basically socket your gear.
Oh, right.
With the magics you want. And then it uses the sphere grid from Final Fantasy X to basically pick your passive stats. And they basically have taken a little bit of everything and made it work. But if you, I'm going to type in Google here, game played forever GDC, because I think you might, yes. Designing Path of Exile to be played forever, and I'm not going to play the video, but I am going to paste it to you because I think you would appreciate this GDC talk by the developer. They actually explain how they build Path of Exile levels, and it turns out that they literally take a 2D like top-down map, and they paint colors. Like the red color indicates players can't walk here. So they might have a river, for example, and they'll draw like 3 or 4 instances of this map, and then they'll run it through their algorithm, and it will generate a bunch of variations, Diablo style, of that. But it's almost completely prefab tech, where they will build a tile set, then they will paint the like 3 or 4 different variations of it, and then have their tech finish it basically, and it's something you might appreciate.
Oh, way. Yeah, no, thank you for sending that to me. I've definitely got it in my inbox there.
Mm-hmm.
Zane, out of curiosity, since we're talking about maps and levels and all that, could you talk a little bit about how that information is currently stored in Yserbius? Like, is there such a thing as a map file, or is this all like rooms in a database, or how is it structured?
Yeah, okay, so my map format mirrors very closely the original game's format. Now, the original game stores its data in a flat pack format, so you just have raw data byte arrays, right? And what the original game did is, to make sure that nobody was messing with the data, they had a very simple obfuscation scheme. They did a shift right or shift left by a certain number of bits every 16-bit word, because of course, this is a game which was meant to run on old systems. It runs on x86 16-bit system. So what I've done is, each tile in this game has walls. So yes, there's a wall. No, there's a wall. It has decorations on the wall. So like, is there a door here? Yes or no? You guys may have noticed that like white walls often are impassable until you do something interesting with them, whereas brown doors are easily passable. Well, that's because that's built into the original game. White walls are just a developer shorthand for not being easily passable. Mm-hmm. Each tile, in addition to having walls and decorations, has 6 events. 1 event for when you arrive in that tile for the first time, 1 event that's related to an encounter, a set piece encounter that I'm sure you guys have seen before. Mm-hmm. And then 4 events for when you face and move into. The same event is called for both kinds of user interactions. Each of the cardinal map directions, north, east, south, and west. So how do those events then correspond to scripts? And these scripts are all available on my GitHub. If you search for Yserbius data, just one word, you're going to find it. The scripts were transpiled from the original map scripts, which were written in C++, compiled with some version of Borland, and then, of course, assembled down to x86 machine language. In the original game, these are loaded as windowed executables. So what that means is the programmers had a area of memory, and they would just load the x86 machine code in there, and that would define what scripts or what events were called when you activated a certain event. Now I took that x86 machine code and I transpiled it into C#, which runs on the server because everything's written in C# on this server.
Okay.
So in short, to summarize, when you walk into a wall that has an event, it calls C# code that then calls the events, causes you to have this encounter, shows you a door that can be unlocked, shows you a message, shows you an NPC. So to follow up with your question, like, is this like a bunch of rooms? I mean, yes and no. Obviously, a party or a player can only inhabit one distinct space, one tile within a map. But like the monsters don't really exist in that map. Instead, they exist in kind of this alternate combat mode, right? So does all that make sense?
Yes, that was actually a very nice, and I appreciate the detail in the answer because I'm very curious about that sort of thing. So yeah, it's good to hear how that works in the original and how you've adapted that into your .NET program that you've got here.
Interesting aside, the rest of Imagination Network was written in this programming language called Large Scale Creative Interpreter, or LSCII, right? It was it's the same language as they were writing King's Quest in back in the day, plus some networking. Yserbius is like one of the only games on that service, in addition to Red Baron and 3D Golf, that was not written in LSCII. So
I lost chance at solid heater shield.
What's going on?
I accidentally closed down on a really good shield potentially.
Yeah,
I've
I've had that happen about 3 times today. Now, I've been streaming for over 4 hours, so, you know, it was bound to happen a couple times, but, you know, it's like, oh, there's a really good sword, and it's gone. Because I accidentally click on the backpack instead of the armor. And that's happened a few times where I accidentally close out the loot window because I'm actually trying to click the armor here. The equip screen. That is an interesting thing that's happened a few times. I hadn't thought about that. I do appreciate, by the way, I do notice the lock symbol that appears next to party members' avatars as a way to prevent you from accidentally ruining their loot.
Oh yeah, that's that conveyance, right? In fact, I stop you from moving, so
Yes.
you can't take things away from them.
Yes, and that I'm flashing back, of course, to taking a wizard and forcing armor onto them.
Oh yeah, that was a thing.
Yes. Let me see here. I was gonna say, we have a question in the chat. Is key mapping something that's planned in the future?
I hadn't planned on it. I could see where that would be very nice for some people.
Controller
It's
support.
not an interface affordance that I had ever really considered putting back together.
I'm just
You
saying.
know, it's just like one more layer of abstraction, right?
Yeah.
Like, I could see that it would be helpful. At the same time, like, I have a lot of code in the game currently that kind of changes the way that you interact with it based on
Yes.
whether or not you want to use WASD versus the arrow keys.
No, well, what I was gonna say is if you had key binding in that way, people would then ask for controller support next. That's what would happen. That I guarantee you.
An entirely valid request. Although, let me tell you, I'm not sure that the interface libraries that I use that interface with the hardware support controllers.
I completely understand.
Hilarious.
Well, OpenMW, the open source Morrowind engine, and Daggerfall Unity both gained controller support, but it took them about 3 to 4 years to do it after it started getting requested. I have controllers, many of them, but I tend to only use them in 2D side-scrolling platformers or third-person action-adventure games. That I don't see them quite as useful for first-person games myself, but I see a lot of demand for it.
Well, I'll tell you what,
Seen
Zane.
those videos where people play Fortnite on like an instrument, and I think those are glorious.
Oh, Overwatch with the bananas, yes.
After you get Yserbius working on my Steam controller, I personally can't wait to try it out in VR.
I mean, this is the first-person view. It's perfect for that application.
Oh my! I'm just thinking. I mean, hold on. Let me pull something up really quick because I guarantee you, video games, people don't necessarily appreciate how some video games can be played in VR.
Oh. What is that man doing to those vegetables?
Yes, it's Morrowind there. So,
oh, okay, that's really cool.
That's Morrowind, the open source Morrowind engine. Someone went to the effort of making it VR capable, and so
I love the idea of having the open book and that being your interface. Oh my goodness.
Yes, that's Morrowind. Yep, and you can see his left hand has his stats on it, floating over him.
That's too much. I really dig that.
Yep. Just a thought. Games that were like VR. How do I put this? Okay, around the time Morrowind was coming out, I had played Doom, the original Doom, in VR. And people ask, well, how did you do it all the way back then? Well, they had these CRT headsets that they'd strap to your face, and I'm not joking. That was VR back then. And the original Doom, I did go to a place and play it that way. It was kind of ridiculous, but it was a lot of fun. Obviously, the CRT headsets had to be suspended by cables because they were heavy. But but the point is that this has been only dreamed of in super expensive concepts, and now that we have the Oculus for a couple $100 or less, it's completely possible to just sit down, trick the Oculus into thinking it's not on Facebook dedicated device, and you're playing Morrowind on in VR. So game development, modding, all kinds of things that the people who made Morrowind never thought of this. Like this wasn't in the realm of possibility. So yeah, PC gaming really got it good.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yep. Let's see. The movement would fit locomotion controls. Interesting. That is definitely a thought, though. Someone said it just works, of course, because Todd Howard. My goodness, I don't. Have you had any luck contacting any of the people who originally made Serbius? Or do you know anyone in the community who has, if anyone's still alive at this point?
Oh gosh. I've never tried. This is the perpetual problem of the millennial, right? You never feel like you're good enough for anything. And I don't feel like my project is worth the notice of these guys because, Yserbius was a big deal for me. This was like my grail of a game when I was growing up.
Well,
I have tried to recreate this game 3 times now, and this is obviously the one successful version.
yes.
Like the original developers, like this was just a project for them. Like, was it amazing? Yes. Like, were they like at the forefront of online gaming when they did it? Yes. But I guarantee you, when they were done with it, they just went on to their next adventure. The head of the studio, Joe Ybarra, he, the guy who basically produced the Bard's Tale, the first blobber, one of the very first blobbers, later president of Infocom for Pete's sake. He went on to lead the development of the Matrix Online, and then he was teaching video games at a college.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure he's out there. Does he want to hear from me? Probably not.
Probably not. But at the same time, a lot of people do appreciate knowing what happened with their legacy. You'd be surprised. The person who created Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall is only now working on a new game. It's probably going to take years more than anyone anticipated because, of the ambition.
Oh, yeah.
But that wouldn't have happened had an interviewer not thoroughly scoured the internet trying to contact the man, trying to get his attention to kind of get his perspective on it. And the guy doesn't really play video games very much. It wasn't a passion project. It was it was very simply a job, but he appreciated hearing about it, and it led into the creation of a new video game. So I think that at the end of the day, rolling the dice, I'm surprised no one has. That's something I've seen, like dedicated fan channels and whatnot to and dedicated fan blogs to Sierra Games. So I'm surprised that someone out there hasn't tried.
Yeah, you would be surprised how accessible some of these people might be. I know in the free space community, the old space simulation called Free Space was developed by Volition way back in the day and published by Interplay. Over the years, people have reached out at various points just to ask like lore questions about the game and what happened to this. What were you guys thinking when you were writing this part? Or do you have any information about assets or things of that nature? And so many different people who have been involved in the team at various points over the years have come back to community forums or discussion areas and participated. Even we had in the open source version of the game a whole new remastered soundtrack, remastered by the original composer of the score. Wow. And even people like Interplay founder Brian Fargo has joined in on discussions at various times. So some people, I think a lot of it comes down to legacy and just appreciating the fact that people still know and care about their work. I think that actually means a lot to a lot of people, whether you're a developer or a writer or really anything else.
Mm-hmm.
That's a point very well taken, and it really does inspire me to want to reach out to these people. We'll see whether or not I actually have the gumption to do that. No promises.
Well, I'm not telling you you have to. I'm surprised no one has thus far. I considering the number of fans. So that was my take on it. Was less that you have to do this, and more like I'd be surprised that someone out there hasn't tried at least. But
on that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say this game was successful enough to do Twinion and Cador to basically design 2 new whole dungeons and sets of art assets for the same thing. So, like, I wouldn't say that it was a one and done deal, and I'd say that America Online purchased the whole thing in order to shut it down. So there was something to it, you know. Just a
You
thought.
know, on an interesting point, or on a related point, one of my favorite interactions has been kind of hunting down the other people who have tried to make Yserbius recreations. Because, this is the 3rd time that I've tried to recreate them. There are many people out there who were as taken with the game as I was, and talking to them about their own experiences, what they really liked about the original game, and just as importantly, what they had hoped to improve in their own iteration. Like, those have been incredibly rewarding conversations for me. I recently connected with Zenther, and Zenther was a programmer who was very interested in doing his own recreation back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And like, there's an incredible kinship that I felt with him when I connected with him, and we talked about, like, oh my God, this is the game for us, and something that we had hoped to recreate many, many times. And let me tell you, he had a laundry list of great ideas that he never, unfortunately, was able to implement in his own recreation. That kind of inspired me to, like, think of what Yserbius could have looked like, what Yserbius 3, like the Return to Twinion or Betrayal at Twinion or whatever it might have been, coming out in like 1997, 1998, if IN had stayed out of the clutches of AOL.
Again, the more I see what you've done with this, the more I just go, the more I just think to myself, what is, other than the time, obviously, because, you know, time is everything. What's stopping you from making your own legally distinct game using what you've done thus far? Because the interface is almost unrecognizable at this point. Like, you're barely using any of the original interface. Like, you could be using this as a platform to basically beta test your you know, your own video game that, you know, you design as a love letter to Serbius.
No, you brought up the one stopping point, and that is time. Like, you know, when you've got a full-time job, and we've all got jobs that are stressful, and at the end of the day, like, your creative energies just aren't there.
I see.
And of course, you know, we all have to work 5 days a week. So, like, you get to pick which of the 3 important things you're going to do. That is to say, you know, take a day for yourself, complete all your chores that you need to do, reconnect with your friends.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, you've put in so much effort into this thus far that I feel like you are so close to having all the tools you need. Like, as you put it yourself, you know, the engine is the first half, basically. And then
the first 90%, right?
Yeah, the first 90%, exactly. So you essentially have the most of what you need to start making a new video game, and it just comes down to maps and, like, art assets, and let's be honest here, commissioning art assets, especially from interested parties, isn't that difficult anymore. Like, there are a lot of we're not talking about, you know, full 3D rigs or anything. We're talking about, you know, hand-drawn sprites at best, or, you know, what I'm trying to get at is you have most of the work already done. So at some point, if you decide, you know, this was great, but I've implemented Cador, and now that all 3 games are here, instead of continuing to work on this, that map editor, can I generate maps out of it, you know? Can I generate levels out of it? And I can honestly say, just let me ask you, how difficult would it be to replace these textures, this floor texture, these wall textures, to make this legally distinct Serbius? And like, how much effort do you think it would take just to build, say, 5 levels, but 5 areas?
So you raise. I think there's like 3 things you need to do to make a new game based on what's already on the table already.
Yes.
You would need new art assets.
Yes.
I don't think that developing new art assets, and in fact, even ones at a higher resolution that look nicer on the screen, would be that hard. Then you need the maps and the map scripts.
Yes.
Again, I don't think they're that difficult. And by the way, I think you turn around here. I think you're you missed the final thing that you're looking for.
Okay. Well.
He's at the end of the tail of that level. So we talked about art assets. We talked about maps and map scripts.
Yes.
The final thing that's needing to be put together is some kind of, if I'm going to do this, I would hope to kind of reinvent the combat mechanics, because as you and I have discussed previously, in this game, there's not really classes. Yes. There is simply like different progressions of the same class, because every single class is going to end up with every single spell and at the same power, every single skill at the same power.
Okay. My
and
suggestion.
There's going to be a lot of game design that's going to go into developing those mechanics for other classes. Now, is that a fertile field that I would love to plow? Yes. It's going to take time.
I would suggest a classless system with point buy then.
The Raph Koster style of development. No Diku mud for you.
more or less, yeah. I mean, let's be honest here. Deku Mud was the basis of a lot of what I wrote in.
I mean, and which was perfected in EverQuest World of Warcraft.
Yes, absolutely.
Really great games. My favorite games, multiplayer games, were Ultima Online and then Star Wars Galaxies. Both of which were point-buy systems, both of which were fantastic and which allowed just so much player diversity. Love that.
At the end of the day, if your game isn't competitive, you don't really have to worry about balance nearly as much. Yes, balance is good. I mean, you want to, but people find, say, Morrowind, for example, endearing. A game where you can drink 50,000 potions and gain, 10,000 intelligence in order to cast one spell that nukes an entire city. At the end of the day, some systems beg you to break them, but also kind of say this is the way the game is made or designed to be played, but they invite you to break it in many different ways. And I think that old games and games that are heavily inspired by old games, and it's a lot more forgivable to go and design something where you just know someone's gonna break this, but it's okay, because you've kind of conveyed what is intended, and then you let players run wild. That's what I think about like point buy systems and whatnot, because at the end of the day, you're never going to be able to balance it perfectly. Ask Blizzard, PvP was a mistake. Even though I loved it. Even though I loved it, and I had
a glorious mistake.
Yes, even though I loved it and I had fun with it, they ruined the most things in World of Warcraft trying to balance after the fact, because they had something that worked, and then they looked at PvP and said we have to change this, or they looked at PvE and said we had to change this and ruin PvP. So it's important to kind of get an idea of what the game is going to be and stick to it, more or less, I think.
I can only imagine what it must have been like to be in the World of Warcraft development team, their DevOps team, their live team,
Yeah.
knowing that the game has come out probably 6 months before it was ready. Okay, so turn to the left here, like face north.
Yeah, thank you. All right.
Ah, draft stirs the air here, you see?
Yes.
Okay, like
Absolutely.
imagine like and you could tell that the game was not
Yes.
100% ready to go based on
Mhm.
the barrenness of the later zones.
Yes.
Suddenly having server first 60s in the first week or so, and them saying that to themselves like, "Oh my goodness, like our first raid isn't ready yet."
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I was part of the Friends and Family Alpha for World of
Oh, no
Warcraft.
kidding. Wow.
Yeah, the people I used to know who worked at Blizzard, that they aren't a part of that anymore. Most of them are retired. I think one of them is currently with the, they're working on board games now.
John
Um,
Stats, he wrote the WoW Diary, which is, in my mind, the best insider story of
mhm,
the development of World of Warcraft. Highly recommended. John Stats.
mhm. I was in a guild. It was a part, it, let's just say that without naming names, the guild was constantly accused of cheating because it was run by a Blizzard employee. But it was actually for the people in the guild, it was the reverse. You had developers watching, so if you exploited anything, you were banned. and so like basically if you were in this guild, you had a microscope on you by Blizzard. So, there was one guy who was trying to do botting, and it turned out that they used him for data gathering as far as like, how does
Oh,
this
that's
bot
awesome.
operate? They didn't ban him right away. They saw him botting, in the guild, and so they had a GM follow him around and figure out exactly what he was doing, and they used that to kind of figure out this is how the bot behaves. And so it was called WoW Glider. That was the name of the bot. And all the WoW Glider users were simultaneously banned because they were able to analyze the behavior of the bot by following this guy around because he was in our guild. And it's just the idea of we were constantly under, like, the community kept going like, oh, they cleared this, we were never server first, obviously, but they cleared this so quickly, they're obviously cheating, like, it's like, no, we weren't allowed to cheat. Like, if there was an exploit that was, other people were using, we weren't allowed to use it. We were told, no, that's cheating. um so it's just kind of funny how the perspective went. But I'm going to tell you right now, and this is something that, with all the scandals and whatnot with Blizzard, the frat boy culture was kind of true. Like, everyone was a gamer down to, like, the receptionist up front. Everyone. When they were hiring people, they were asking people, what kind of games do you play? So it was never a really professional environment. So when Vivendi went and merged, Activision, just got rid of them, like, Vivendi kind of spat out Blizzard and said, yeah, you merge you and Activision, get the hell out. Um, that whole situation suddenly started to expose them to different workers who they'd never, like, the corporate cultures clashed. That's what I'm trying to say. You had this kind of gamers first mentality, and then you had expectations suddenly start to get placed upon them. The veteran staff were kind of the goose that lays the golden eggs, and so they were left alone for the most part. But over time, they left. And as they left, more and more expectations were placed upon the new people, the people who were hired, either hired in or came up to replace them. They didn't have that rock star status that, you know, protected them, insulated them from the corporate bullshit. So I had a front row seat to hearing people in our IRC server. Can you believe that? Like that's how far back World of Warcraft went. Is, you know, we were still using IRC. I like, people were complaining about how, oh, now we can't even change anything without a mandatory meeting, and it takes 2 weeks to accomplish anything. And you know, like, we're not allowed to visit other departments anymore. We used to get ideas, you know, cross-pollinating around Blizzard. Now we can't do that anymore because, you know, management's being an ass. And I got to hear those complaints front and center. I got to watch as things went downhill, and you know what actually killed Blizzard? It was Hearthstone's success. They realized that a team, like a tiny team of people, was able to bring in such vast amounts of money. And that realization made them take a death grip to Blizzard. Otherwise, they were leaving well enough alone for the most part. But yeah, I mean, I got to watch Blizzard change over time, and that was frustrating, to say the least.
Sad.
Yep.
You know what? My thoughts on the game industry are just that, you know, if you compare a AAA gaming company versus like another AAA tech company like Google, right?
Mm-hmm.
At Google, your engineers, your software developers, they are paid basically FU money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their value is recognized, and that is not the case in the gaming industry.
Yeah.
And so you have to come up with other perks. And some of the relied upon perks are like, you know, a kind of FU culture where you can kind of get away with things that you shouldn't be able to get away with. And I wonder if the profit maximizing style of, well, every business, but gaming specifically that we're talking about, doesn't encourage bad behavior. And I wonder if this wouldn't better be addressed by just paying people more.
I think that a lot of it is not only profit maximizing, but if you look at the employees, they are very often hired based on their passion for video games, because you know, kind of like teachers, for example. Teachers have to be passionate for teaching, otherwise they better be tutors in their private time, because unless you're doing university and you have tenure, you're kind of fucked as a teacher. That's just the reality of it. Like, we're talking like school district, you know, public schools, things like that. Teachers are not paid enough, and I'm just saying it's similar in the games industry, where people aren't paid enough. They have to be passionate for games, and all that passion is exploited by these companies. And that's kind of where we had people at Blizzard. These aren't the people I knew, because all the people I knew had gone long before this. But I've been told by reliable sources that we had people in Irvine living in a 2-bedroom apartment. We had 3 people, not unrelated to one another, sharing a 2-bedroom apartment, using the common area, the living room, as their extra bedroom, because they couldn't afford to live on the salary that Blizzard was paying them in California.
I mean, let's be honest, like, exploitation and underpay is like super rampant in today's economy. It is really sad to see the people making the things that we love be treated that way. And also, as you point out, to have their passion exploited and have that lead to, you know, other undesirable things.
That's right.
Like, just pay them what they're worth.
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, you go on.
There's a great quote that I just found from John Stats in his WoW diary, and it kind of touches on what we were talking about a couple minutes ago. He says, if there is a place where people can exploit gaining experience, items, currency, or reputation, then that's precisely what players are going to do because they always take the path of least resistance.
True.
Since MMO content is measured in months, not hours, the content is paradoxically daunting, so any shortcut to the top will become the most popular route, even if it's not fun. And if a game's path of least resistance isn't fun, it means the game isn't fun. Lazy or inexperienced game developers blame players for ruining a game with aberrant behavior, but these accusations are like dog owners blaming their pets for eating the unhealthy scraps thrown to them.
Yes. Why do you think all of us are spamming death darts right now?
Well, there you go.
Instead
it's
of
only the most effective way of making it through the content in the game.
Yes, I mean, well, we could be using melee, and we could have a ranger shooting arrows from the back row. That is certainly a way for the game to be played, but that's almost like a challenge, for these challenge runs. Those go hand in hand with speedruns and that idea where, we're going to play the game in a very specific way. But when it comes to an MMOs are inherently competitive. Like, people want to be able to show off their character and things like that. There are people in Serbius and Twinion here on your server that are level 200, aren't they?
Oh yeah, they've been pumping quite a lot.
Yeah, and that just shows they are absolutely devoted to it. Have you heard? Well, I was going to ask if you heard of Median XL, but let me rephrase that. Have you heard of anything in the Skyrim mod making space at all? Like the mod makers, the big names in the mod makers in the Skyrim space?
I have not, but I've definitely downloaded quite a few of those.
Well,
again, like, this is a great way to become a video game developer. If you want to just develop mods for an existing game, go for it. This is the way to get into it.
Well, there is a mod maker goes by the name Any Scion. He has made tons of different mods. Let me pull this up. I'm gonna go for the Nexus. That's the best way to explain who he is to show us what he's done. We'll select Skyrim Special Edition, zoom in to a nice big 3-panel here. There we go. So, a Tonal Architect. Let's see, Evanstar, Odin. Triumvirate, Growl, the Werewolf Overhaul. Let's see, Winter Sun, the Faiths of Skyrim. Andromeda, the Standing Stones of Skyrim. Summer Mist, the Enchantments of Skyrim. Sacrosanct, the Vampires of Skyrim. Simuldawn, the Combat of Skyrim. Thunderchild, Shouts and Immersion. Wildcat, Combat Overhaul. Imperious Races of Skyrim. Ordinator, the Perks of Skyrim. Apocalypse, the Magic of Skyrim. He makes system overhauls. He also was known for the earlier version of a little game, a little Diablo 2 mod you might know called Median XL. So that's what I'm getting at here, is all these things are connected in a certain way. I've spoken to him about game design a few times. He may not remember it because, these were big chat rooms with tons of people engaging all at once. But I remember one of his lines. He said something along the lines of, if there are no wrong decisions, then the right decisions don't matter. That's important for player psychology, and he learned that back in Diablo 2. This idea that, yes, there's min-maxing, but there should also be inferior ways to do it, to do pretty much anything. so that the people who choose the superior ways of doing it feel good for doing so. However, the trick is to let people out of their mistakes, which is why once every difficulty level, as of Diablo 2's, I think, 3rd patch, you can respec. Respecing was added later to Diablo 2. You get to do it once per difficulty level, normal, nightmare, and hell. And it was added because it was very punishing. And the respec function was actually added to the beginning of the game, specifically in the rogue encampment, because the issue is when someone figures out their build isn't viable, it's usually stepping into the next difficulty level. And it was a slapdash addition. It was just a perk that was thrown on to the Bloodraven quest. It was a Bloodraven, or was it? It was one of those the earliest quests you can do, and it was specifically. They didn't want to really really spend any development resources at Blizzard fixing this. So what they did was they just wrote a script that refunds your stat in skill points once when you click an option. That option goes away after you're done with it. That's it. It is the simplest way they could have done it, but it's the wrong, there are so many unviable specs in Diablo 2, and that's why you really appreciate, the Den of Evil? Thank you. You appreciate the viable specs because there are so many wrong or suboptimal ways to do it. And I'm just saying, he brought that up in a conversation. It was a rather large conversation on game design at the time. But the point is, he's a Skyrim mod maker who also did Diablo 2 modding, and that ties into pretty much everything we're talking about. Player psychology.
For you then, if you have objectively optimal builds plus easy respecs, is there any alternative to keeping gameplay fresh than a continual rebalancing of the specs that are available to the players?
That's true. I mean, the only other option is add new content, and that new content focuses on things that the other specs would find more or less viable. So, new content says fire spells are not good. So what happened to all your fire mages? Well, they're going to respec, most likely. And in that sense, you're not rebalancing the game, you're adding new content that players think is relevant, and therefore the relevant content is causing the meta to shift.
I totally dig that. Although I also, when I was playing vanilla back in the pre.12 days, my favorite things that happened were when they spent an entire patch going over one of the classes, right? Okay, this time we're doing paladins. That whole talent tree that basically amounted to one heal that was kind of cruddy. We've made it a lot better. And then suddenly people had to reevaluate not just the class, but when you were playing that class, what you were doing with it.
Although, if I'll be honest with you, if you were taking Serbius here, and you were making a legally distinct version of Serbius, with new art assets, and you built yourself a little map editor that can actually spit out actual Serbius levels, and you were rebranding as its new thing, what I would do is I would probably approach it more as a milestone development system. What I mean by that is you spend your lion's share of the time, because you already have the engine, that's done, but let's say you spent your time developing a new, new levels, and you added some AI to make the monsters a little more spicy. What do you do from there? You spend most of your time building this game. Game is built in, say, 3 years, 4 years. Is it a gigantic game? No. It's, you still get that guy who finishes it in 1 hour, 45 minutes, speedrunning it. Most players, probably a little closer to, 7, 8 days played, because, it's... there's a lot of grindiness if you're not, powering through it. But what do you do then? And the answer is, you're asking, how do you keep people from getting bored? And the answer is usually either rebalancing the game a bunch, which would piss people off, because you can, by rebalancing a game, you can never make 100% of the people happy. At the end of the day, some people are going to be happy, and other people are going to be angry about it. That's why I look at it more like milestone, milestones of development. So what you could do in that case is you would create, in the old style, expansion packs. You wouldn't have to change your core systems up too much. Just create content that challenges players in new ways that make them go, well, I kind of want to... it turns out, look, I get it. Death Darts is awesome, but these wizards here, they cast this thing called backfire counterspell, where my Death Darts come back at me. So how do I deal with that? Well, I have to cast silence on them first, and so suddenly silence becomes the meta for this one particular area. And you look at that, and you basically change the way they think about the game, or the way the class. Maybe some areas have resistances, fire resist, cold resist, whatnot. So maybe fireball isn't great, but this particular area is a swamp, indoor swamp, whatever, what about lightning? Lightning bolt. Lightning bolt looks great, so you get more people speccing into lightning bolt. Getting gear that supports, because remember, you've already set up gear with visible stats. So what's the is it really too difficult to say 10%, a gear that says 6% more effective lightning bolts or whatever? So people will find that gear valuable. They won't find it valuable later when you create another expansion that introduces a particular valley that is based on something entirely different. My point is, by adding content, which you can then sell for not a lot of money, like say $10, $20. I guess $20 is what people would expect for the whole game, so maybe more closer to $10. You could encourage people to try new content and change the meta of the game, whilst simultaneously not pissing off the people who did not decide to buy into that new content. The people who want to continue playing the game the way it was originally when they first bought it are not suddenly thrust into a position where they go, well, this isn't working anymore. They if they don't like the DLC, let's be honest, they can refund it on Steam. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. And to spit back what you're talking about, right back to you, I think I understand what you're saying as making sure that every single class is distinct in combat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Also making sure that you have a attunement, right? An attunement, a ladder that forces people to reevaluate what is really good.
Yes.
Something that original World of Warcraft, and the last expansion that I ever played was Burning Crusade. I remember the attunement chart from that expansion. It was phenomenal. But yeah, like constantly forcing you to reevaluate what equipment is best, what classes are best, what builds are best.
Mhm.
In addition to all that, I would add one more thing which is really appropriate for this style of game. I would
Okay.
say each class should have its own unique way of navigating or affecting the map. Now, the easy way or easy example of this would be like a rogue or a thief has the
Okay.
lockpick skill. Only the rogue thief should have the lockpick skill. And it should be a way of exploring areas, making shortcuts, and only parties that have a thief with them should be able to explore certain areas of the map.
Okay.
Make every character feel special. Maybe the wizard has the ability to activate teleports that move them around the map in different way. No
Yes.
other class has that. I don't know what it would be for barbarian, knight, cleric, but I'm certain that there's other things.
No, hold on. Okay, so for create fake verticality, something like a trap door that you can see on the quote-unquote ceiling or somewhere above. And well, that an archer, it turns out, ranger, sorry, uses a grappling hook ability. Go
Grappling hook, yep.
and all it is a simple teleport script. That's it. It's just visually, it's represented differently. Even if what's actually happening is the screen turns black, you're in a different location. The flavor text and the skill information indicates that this does thing. Therefore, you know, the imagination fills in the rest. In a modern game with high definition graphics, no one's gonna buy that. But in a game like this, where the ceiling is represented by darkness, you see a little trap door up there in the darkness, and you can believe these things because the imagination is fueling the rest of this. That's the advantage to having low quality graphics, or you know, less lower fidelity graphics, not low quality, low fidelity. You know, you have a barbarian who can let's just say can smash through walls, and you know, when they smash the wall, it would that would be the brute force mechanic where you know, obviously it would instantly repair itself because it's still an online game, MMO type deal. But it would work just like the detect skill makes doors appear sometimes, right?
Phenomenal.
Yeah. So the point is, just by using a skill, an icon to represent the skill, a little, like you know, nothing bigger than a standard icon, and some flavorful text that plays, you can use the existing mechanics of the game to create traversal options for the different classes that make them feel unique. It's not that big a deal.
I think there's a lot of potential there. It's just, you know, coming up with all of the different mechanics
I'll let you
and
know a
then
little secret.
implementing them.
I'll let you know a little secret. That's why the overwhelming majority of game development is a collaborative process and not a single indie developer doing everything. That's even games that are like Stardew Valley, for example, you know, where you look at this and this one developer has done so much. They had help. They definitely had help at different points in time. The community was extremely helpful. Anyway, curious sounds can be heard through the wall. Oh my goodness. So, DB Fig says, everything is my idea and I'm always right. That's a cool guy. If you ever want someone to give you an honest opinion about your video games, I've seen DB tackle a lot of different games, so he might be someone to talk to for like testing from an outside perspective, someone who like isn't into Serbius but looking to get into a game like this. You might want to ask him about that because he gives really good feedback.
Right on.
Yeah. Let's see here. I think the answer is detect. Oh, sliding door that must be picked to be opened. Well, I know someone here has a lockpick. Give it a try. Anyway, we've kind of gone off into the territory of just what if scenarios, and a little less into the game itself. So I've got to say though, people were asking me, is Cador on your list of things to fix or to implement?
Sure. I mean, apologies. So, what's up with Cador? I am hoping to continue my development of my original game content translator so that instead of translating to C#, it'll translate directly into my lock script alternative.
Ah, okay.
So then, like, I've totally proven that I can have an entire game hosted entirely using my editable on-the-fly framework. So that's one thing that's really holding me back. But also, I hate to say it, but like, I never played Cador online. Like, my parents had canceled their subscription by the time that Cador had came out in 1995. And so I don't have the same connection to it.
Yeah.
I am not arguing that it's like a worse game, but I have looked at all of the scripts and the maps, and they just don't seem to have the same sort of creativity that I saw in Yserbius and Twinion. Like, there's a lot of like, make sure that you follow this entire map that is just like a little cyclone leading in one direction after another.
Yeah. It's less labyrinthine and more deliberate path through a long trail. I've noticed that.
Also, it's not in the same universe as Yserbius and Twinion, which I think was a mistake.
I thought it was on the mainland.
It's obviously like a interpretation of Macbeth, right?
Okay, yeah.
Sure, we can say it's on the mainland, but like, why is Shakespeare on the mainland? I want to know.
Yeah. I mean...
So, that said, I recognize that Cador has like a special importance for many players of these old games, and so I would be remiss if I were not to eventually translate Cador. And I'm gonna do it one day. It's just like not a high priority for me.
I think that how do I put this? So at the end of the day, people just like this style of gameplay and want more of this, and I think that's what I think that's what a lot of it is. Not necessarily that people are nostalgic for Cador, but more like, I played so much Serbius and there's really nothing more to do here. I want to play, this other game that's very similar to it in almost every way, functionally speaking. I guess that's kind of how I interpreted the demand for it, at least. I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say that people might be just as happy getting a legally distinct version of the game from you or from anyone else, and saying like, this is the spiritual successor, kind of like, have you ever played Bloodstained Curse of the Moon by chance?
We have the negative hat trip. I am 0 for 3 in all 3 of the games that you have asked me if I've heard of them. I've never heard of that one.
Well, here's the thing. So, Castlevania Symphony of the Night was a very popular game. The creator who made that game, along with Order of Ecclesia, along with what do you call it? Sorry about that. I see the bot killed your light.
No worries. I'll just add the Google.
No, let me go VIP Zane W. Okay, you're a VIP. It shouldn't be deleting your links anymore. Anyway, let's see here. What was I gonna say? Ah, yes. So there were a bunch of games. There were a bunch of video games that were all in the same style. They invented the Metroidvania genre, basically. The idea that this was originally Metroid, but you know, Castlevania went and was that way. There is a lot of demand for Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and that's why Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. Let me pull up the Kickstarter here just to show you how kind of ridiculous the demand was. We pull up the Kickstarter here, you can see it made a little bit of money, just a little bit of money, and it turned out to be a good video game. It turned out to be like I actually. Hold on. He did this little Kickstarter thing, but let me pull up the example.
Oh, that's awesome.
Should be. I'm just gonna pull up the Switch trailer because I know that one is descriptive of what I would want to show you. Here we go. So, this is the best way to explain it. So, this is a legally distinct version of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Instead of having Alucard, you have this lady named Miriam, but she's going through the castle, you know, completely different art style, obviously. But yes, this is Castlevania Symphony of the Night, just the sequel, you know, unofficially made by the guy who originally directed it. And so it's the idea of these games. There's always a demand for, I liked this thing, but can I have this thing again, but with more? And so that's where the Cador, that's where the Cador kind of demand, I think, comes from. Hold on, let me pull up Curse of the Moon trailer to Castlevania 3, like kind of the way Castlevania Symphony of the Night is to Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, as Castlevania 3 is to Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. And so this NES game was made in like 2018. And people bought so many of so much, this sold so well that they made a sequel to this. And even though you look at it, it looks like an NES game, you know? But so many people wanted Castlevania 3 that they managed to do it. And so that's just kind of the world we live in. Is there is a lot of nostalgia that is marketable, but at the same time, and I'm not saying that you want to cynically copy it, but you can tell the difference between a cynical copy and one that's done with passion. The difference between a copy and a spiritual successor. You know what I mean?
Yep. That game that we just looked at, that was a glorious NES representation, but re-implemented with modern hardware. I'm guessing.
Yes.
Because we definitely were abusing the 8 sprite per line limit.
That's
I saw
right.
no flashing.
That's right. They absolutely. It could not run on original hardware. There is no way. There is actually co-op in the sequel. It was never really requested, but it's there, and people love it for that. So, yeah, DB Fig said it right there. The original director was like, if Konami won't let me make one, I'll quit and make my own version. I mean, that's kind of what ended up happening. Now, obviously, giant budgets let you do that. Some people argue whether it really was up to snuff or not. I'd argue the art style of the other one, the one I showed you first, isn't really like as good necessarily, but at the same
Mhm.
time, functionally, at the heart and soul of the video game, shows that it's a love letter and that it's improved in so many different ways. And so that's more or less what I'm talking about when I say a legally distinct Serbius is I'm just saying, like, there are ways to, without breaking the bank, both time and money wise, showing your passion for the original game, but simultaneously saying, yeah, we can do these bits better. And I think that just comes down to your experience implementing it and then taking feedback from people. And I think that if you did decide to make your own Serbius spiritual successor, um, this particular project would be an invaluable resource, and specifically its community, because you could hear directly from the people's mouths, making a quote unquote test server or whatever. Like, I like this part, but I don't like this or that, and you'd learn things from it. So I'm just saying, like, if you did decide to do such a thing, um, adding on to this might actually be a good way to approach that. Just a thought.
Right on. Well, I mean, no
Mhm.
promises, but
Yeah.
watch this space.
Yes, exactly. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying, like, it's a good idea, maybe, possibly. Um, all right. Let me see here. So, someone in the chat asked if you'd open source this particular project. I know you said that you've open sourced the Serbius Data 1 on GitHub.
Mhm.
That is not functionally this game though, right? That is just the
That's true.
yes.
So, to be clear,
Mhm.
the genesis of this version of
Mhm.
Yserbius came from when I was studying for the bar. The
Mhm.
bar exam is that thing that you have to pass if you want to be a lawyer and practice in a given state. And I was
Yes.
stressed out as all heck and could not bear studying anymore, which is
Mhm.
probably why I didn't get as high a score as I had hoped. But I still passed. I still passed. I can
Mhm.
still practice.
Yes.
Um, and when I was stressed out, instead, I decided I was going to dig into Yserbius
Mhm.
and see if I could finally figure out what all of the data fields actually meant. And so that is what is on that GitHub repository that I just linked.
Mhm.
It is the genesis of another Yserbius project. Now, am I going to open source this project? No, because like I've put so much time into it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't feel that I can really, I would feel bad if someone else took all of my work and made some money off of it, right? That's
Yeah.
really what it comes down to.
Mm.
I put together an open source Ultima Online client
Mhm.
back in the day, and I put a lot of time into it, and I got it like 98% of the way there, and then I just kind of said, you know what? I don't need to spend any more time on this, so I just kind
Mhm.
of left it on GitHub. And I mean, what do you know? Someone else took all of my source code that I had on the internet, and they made their own client. And am I anywhere in the credits on that? No. Even though you can tell, like they are still using my code
Mhm.
for pretty much everything in there. Now, I want to take a step back and say, have they improved it 100,000%? Yeah.
Mhm.
But like, that doesn't bother me because I was obviously just recreating something which already existed. This is like something that's completely
Yeah.
new, even though it's recreating an original or an old game.
Okay. Um. Yeah, I can see that.
So,
And
like, what would be really cool though is if I could create an open platform where people could create their own games. Is that remotely possible? I don't know.
mm,
There's a lot of trolls out there. If I made an open platform, could we see somebody like creating something which I wouldn't want to have associated with myself? Maybe.
yeah, that's the problem. Is the moment you start taking, like, Because you take control of something and then you take responsibility for it, not legally necessarily, but socially. And
Reputationally, yeah. I don't want.
yes.
And the worst thing about trolls is when you tell them don't do that, they're like, okay, well, let me find some other way to break your thing.
Yep, it's true. I do think the idea of an open platform is great, but I would say that at the end of the day, that's why when I recommended the idea of having the map editor spit out a particular script file, and then you would go and you would investigate which scripts you'd want to use in what areas, because at the end of the day, I don't trust the internet. And if you create an open platform, at that point you kind of need to let it go, or otherwise, you're going to constantly have to look over your shoulder, and get some perspective, and it's going to become a second job, and that's just something that you'd have to kind of pay attention to, and I don't think you would want to do that in that sense.
It is it's easy to talk about and easy to consider like what the best practice would be, but I'm just a dude out there on the internet, and I don't want to create a platform that has content on it that would make me upset.
Yeah, I completely understand that. There is just now someone asked, whoa, are you playing with people online? Why don't you tell them about the server and how many people it can support these days?
Well, it can create, or it can host an infinite number of people, right?
Okay.
This is a labor of love. It is constructed out of about 135,000 lines of source code of C#. The server's running on .NET Core 6.0 LTS. The client runs on Windows and Macintosh on .NET Framework 4.6.2. Although I have seen some people running on Linux, and the way I can tell they are running on Linux because they keep sending me like weird error logs, because I've set up the client to automatically send me error logs whenever you have a problem.
Yeah.
And I see some like bizarre things that would only happen on Linux, but Linux users, they're willing to put in the time to make it work. And so eventually they all get it to the point where they can log on and play it.
Yep. Con.
Working just fine over here.
Yeah, Con. What's your fourth character slot called?
Oh, for some reason I noticed that when I'm on the character creation screen, that the fourth slot, it says new character here will be named Wine Test.
So that must be the name of your fourth character slot in Twinion.
Oh, I haven't played Twinion, but it may have been. Are character names reserved at any time for like any length of time?
100% reserved. You are the only person who will ever be Wine Test on this server ever, forever. So long as you have
I think
a
I made a
character named Wine
throwaway
Test.
character named Wine Test at one point when I was trying to make something.
Oh boy, that's funny.
Lane, check and see if you can use that armor. That's 300 extra mana.
All right. Well.
So yeah, I beat. These guys are playing in a party of 4. Sarik plus 3 of his friends. The total number of people who have played is about 1,800 over the past 3 years. They've logged, 37,000 hours of playtime total, I think. Which is like not the next Fortnite, but it's a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I do notice that there are times when you'll get like about 20 players on, or 10 players on, and that's more than that's definitely more than you would see in how do I put this? There's just no one looking at certain games at all. Whereas the Imagination Network had a lot of people really invested in it. And even if you don't really like the you don't care about backgammon or the other services that the Imagination Network had, this particular game definitely had something going for it, and its style again bared repeating twice. Like, it's not just something they put together and said, oh well, it didn't work. They made a sequel, then they made a spin-off, and so there's obviously something to this that got people originally invested in. And I think that if you look at the logs, you'll see that a lot of people played yesterday when I was streaming it yesterday. Like, there were at least 4 or 5 people who aren't on today who were messing around with it doing dungeon crawling. So it's a niche, yeah, but it like, considering the very, very low amount of people who are aware of it, I think the conversion is pretty high. Like, the percentage of people who've looked at this and at least gave it a try. So
now it just needs to be like accessible, and that's where
yeah.
that potential quest log or telling people to automatically download and open that
Yeah.
that walkthrough helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that a quest log can really work with the way this is now. I think, how do I put this? You remember the way the game originally had 2 bags? One bag for your normal stuff and one bag for your quest items, even though it was used willy-nilly.
Yep.
It almost makes me think that that quest items should occupy not necessarily your inventory, but some sort of variable that allows them to be used either automatically or be pulled out of almost a bag of holding, to where you don't even think about quest items as inventory items. That kind of system would more readily allow you to handle a quest log sort of system. The problem is there's so many states you can get into right now where, you don't have the quest item you need, but the quest log would say you need to do this, and I can't do this. Well, how do you do it? And unless you set up new script triggers all over the map that constantly check the player's state to see that they had this item, having a detailed quest log is kind of out of the question, I think.
Yeah, probably not achievable.
Yeah. DB just created a character. Cool. Was gonna say.
We wish you luck. The dungeon can be a cruel mistress.
Yeah, my recommendation is always go to the Hall of Doors, but be careful of what do you call them? The tile encounters as opposed to the random encounters. You at level 0, you should just do a couple random encounters. That'll be fun. But beware of like dedicated tile encounters. And I don't know. Maybe if the first couple major encounters were telegraphed a little more, people wouldn't die to them as readily. But yeah, that's again, there's always a quit moment for someone. You know, like the number of people that convert into long-term players will be lower than 100% all the time, and any attempts to make it 100% will end in failure. So, the end of the day, you just have to look at it and ask, how much of the game's original vision do I want to compromise in order to build some sort of conveyance system? And other than telegraphing certain parts of the early game experience, I don't think there's much you can do. Like, there's such a thing as a training period where players are expected to have their hand held, but once you get out of that initial training period, the game should remain the game, I think. That's my opinion.
Right on. Nope, no disagreement here.
So, like, the problem is you're just dumped into King Cleowen's quest, like, right off the bat, and you have no idea what you're doing. So I almost think that maybe, possibly, you create a new quest for new play. I know this might be pushing it a little bit, but create a new quest for new players. Like when you spawn in, you're given some kind of objective that will force you to get into a combat, win that combat, then go back to the guild, creating a core gameplay loop that will make the player comfortable with the video game without actually changing anything of the Cleowen quest. Because if you change any of the Cleowen quest, that's way too much effort. Whereas creating a couple new script triggers that just say, "Oh, you're a new player. Go over here and fight this goblin, or fight this pack of wolves. Okay, you killed the 2 wolves. Very good. Now take the wolf fang back to the guild, and sell this thing. Okay, you did the thing. You're on your own now. Good luck." And I think that, like, this particular tile, and you have the tile glow on the map for as long as they have the quest, okay? And it goes, like, these tiles are, encounter tiles, and, like, they could be anywhere in the dungeons, so keep that in mind, Just a little bit of information that players could easily skip by if they don't care, or give them an option to just say, "No thanks, I don't need a tutorial," like...
If you wanted to do a tutorial like that, it could also be the perfect testing ground for kind of what we were talking about earlier, with the possibility of integrating new maps. I know I was looking at your GitHub repo for the data there, and is that everything that you would need to integrate a new map? Just some of those files that you have in the maps directory? Or is there a server-side component to the maps?
So the maps are entirely server-side. When they are edited at this point, there's a copy that's downloaded to your client, but I have not yet operationalized a saving component, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, obviously, our clients don't contain any of those map files, but I mean, just the data that you have, like, in your GitHub repo, in the public one, is that all that's really required to make a map?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, but in the abstract, absolutely. Yes, 100%. Yes, I said yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking, like, if you wanted to do, like, a little tutorial, like Zarek was just describing, it wouldn't even necessarily have to be integrated with the rest of the game. It could be, like, just some disembodied area, and then you get dumped out into the, the lobby or whatever when you leave that zone or teleport out.
No, that is glorious. I totally dig it.
Yeah, I mean, you could literally have, like, an 8x8 cube of rooms that you would just teach players in with some pop-ups, and then once you finished it, it's like, your guild training is now complete. it would just dump you into the game after, and maybe when you're creating the character, have a checkbox that says tutorial, and have the checkbox on by default, but let people just uncheck that checkbox. So speedrunners, for example, wouldn't be hindered by it. You know, they just wouldn't interface with the tutorial at all. But you know, just a tiny like 8x8 cube where like the next room is going to or sorry, the next square is an encounter square, you know, stuff like that. Like very, very simple, tiny, no need to build anything dramatic or use new art assets. You can just use existing assets. That's what I think, anyway.
I really appreciate the back and forth. I mean, it's definitely something that I should pursue at this point. Seems like the interest is there.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who are, you know, who absolutely look at this and go, "This is kind of interesting." So, yeah, I'm wondering how far you could take this, but at the end of the day, baby steps. That's the best way to do it.
We'll have to touch base in a little while and see if I've actually operationalized any of these things.
Yes, absolutely.
But they are all excellent ideas.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, like, this is already such a huge accomplishment. Like I said earlier, I mean, if we were playing the original version of this, it would be a lot less enjoyable, just based on, you know, all you've done to really center the gameplay and the teamwork and take away a lot of the uncertainty and the rough edges and make it an accessible experience. Is a huge achievement, and honestly something that would already look really, really good in your portfolio.
I really appreciate that. And, you know, on that note, I know a lot of people out there want to complete their own game, or maybe they have another project they're working on that is a video game or a book or a web comic or even like a big school project. I have found that the only way to get things accomplished, if you really want to complete a project, the one tip that I can offer is rigorous upfront planning. You have to sit down, you have to really think about the high-level features that need to be implemented. And then you break down those high-level features into the systems that will be needed to implement those features. And you break those systems down to the steps that are necessary to get those systems working. If you can take the time up front to plan out exactly how you will do what you need to get accomplished to get to where you need to go, it is only when you have a roadmap that you're able to get accomplished what you want to do.
Yeah, I absolutely understand that. Yes, that's about it. I really don't have much else to talk about at this point in time, other than it's great work, and I would very much like to get more people into it. But at the same time, like, I understand where people are coming from when they're asking for either you know, either Cador to be implemented, or let's add new areas to the game where we can have new quests and stuff. And I think at the end of the day, you might want to consider getting community sourcing some of this stuff, maybe building some sort of a framework where people can submit not necessarily ideas, but areas or things like that, because you know, maybe they can only use those in their own little test bed until you approve them or implement them. But and what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, I think that if you make moves for more community involvement, I think you might get some of that involvement. That's all I'm saying. So whether you decide to take those steps or not is up to you. But I love what you have here thus far, and I do plan on playing more of it.
Awesome. Well, I've really appreciated this opportunity to share my own perspective and to get yours and Con and everyone. It was really great talking to you, and I appreciated being able to interact with your chat room. It's awesome opportunity. And, you know, Guys, take care and hope to talk to you again soon.
All right. Before you go ahead and I know this sounds backwards, but go ahead and introduce yourself one more time and go ahead and remind people where they can find the stuff that you want them to find, because we're going to be turning this into a YouTube video, and people who aren't interacting with us in real time should know this stuff.
Sure. So my name's Zane. In my day-to-day job, I'm an attorney that works on privacy regulations and health law. But in my spare time, I program Medievalands at Medievalands.com. It is a complete recreation of these old dungeon crawlers, massively multiplayer games from the Imagination Network, first published in 1991.
Okay.
Look at all those people who have completed the game. You too could be on this wall of fame.
That's right. So, if they wanted to hop into this game, where would they go to do that?
So this is Medievalands.com. So medieval, right? And then lands, but there's only one L in there because that's how it was back on the Imagination Network. So Medievalands.com.
All right. Well, thank you for showing up, and I will see you hopefully sooner than 2 years this time.
Sounds great. Take care until then. Bye, guys.
Bye.